Hi, everyone. This is Patti Minegishi Delacruz. I said it right? Yes.
Yes.
And I've known Patti since 2015 when we both did the Chicago Area Writing Project together. And ever since then, we have traveled to Madison, to Minneapolis. We got involved in the National Writing Project. We traveled to Atlanta. So it's been such a pleasure in knowing you. And I know that you teach at Evanston High School. But if you could tell us a little bit more about your background and also what you're studying.
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you, Amy. I always appreciate time to be with you, right? So I am a classroom teacher at Evanston Township High School. I am currently teaching English and reading, and I have the privilege of teaching reading with, as partnership with civics teachers and an amazing biology teacher. A little shout out to Miss Toronda Woods, who's an amazing teacher and researcher at Evanston Township. And I also just finished a time period of teaching as the journalism teacher and the newspaper sponsor there at Evanston.
So you guys check out the Evanstonian if you haven't. It's bold.
Yes. I'm not on the Evanstonian anymore. Yeah, I do. I do miss the kids. And I always wish the very best for them. But they're now going to have someone who's purely dedicated towards that. I am really excited about my forward path into a more concentrated time in the reading program at Evanston Township. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. I'm also a teacher researcher through UIC. So I am working on a PhD through the Language Literacy and Culture Department in the Curriculum and Instructions, College of Education. And I am currently working on some research. I'm trying to work on this research, remotely in some senses, right? But I am looking into how students enact their digital practices in liminal school spaces. So the places where the students are most authentic, right? Like their lunch periods and their passing periods and the time periods where we catch them doing just some of the most creative things and, the things that are probably just most reflective of their whole personality, right? And I'm looking at what that reflects about students' identities. And their practices are reflecting about their students' identities and also what implications it has for us as classroom teachers. I think that there is still a chasm, right, between what teachers understand, and I'll speak for myself, what I understand as the tool, as the practice, right, and then the opportunities for us to learn. And so my research is really delving into where are those disconnects happening, right? And also recognizing that there's disconnects between the actual research itself and what teachers practice in the classroom. Yeah. And that's not blaming teachers by any means. It's not even blaming really the researchers, but there is a disconnect, right? So recognizing that there are nuances to that and real implications for students that I think we need to pay attention to as a broader, academic and professional community. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, let me bring it down to a level of, before we enter our student story, ignorant stories.
Yes.
I jumped on TikTok during COVID.
Yes.
And I thought, I'm going to dances and everything. And then I ended up finding an amazing community of just some Christian Bible teaching, truth telling, amazing education. And I don't go on every day because it is so addictive, but there's quite a medium the kids are tapping into that we did not know about. And I know they're probably upset that we even jumped into that, but I had to share that with this digital.
I think it's great. I think that's great. And students are leading the way, right? Young people are leading the way for us to think of, to rethink about the ways we engage in community with one another. So I love that.
And I know some kids really did some good assignments during the remote learning too because of TikTok style. Let me just segue first before we go into all our discussion. If I could talk about one ignorant story that, it's either a stupid story, quirky story, stupid story. I'll start.
Yeah.
When I was teaching in Los Angeles in the 90s, about midway through, I was there for 11 years. Midway through, I said, that's it. I'm done. I'm exhausted. I'm going to go be a flight attendant. So I go to LAX. I take this test. I don't know. I didn't know the test. When the circle is the yellow, it spelled out the word yellow, but maybe it's in the color green. Well, now I learned it was the concussion test. I didn't pass the test. So therefore, I couldn't be a flight attendant. I did not pass a concussion test, which is another argument for teaching. It makes you concussed. I know we've talked about this in our class, that we feel concussed daily because it's just so insane. That's why I really welcome this.
My eyes just went inwards. I was like, oh
yeah. So you get it. So That's my stupid story.
Yeah, I do love that story. Mine is even like way younger, right? Like when I was young, my mom's a hairstylist. You know, she's been a hairstylist in Chicago like since she, you know, graduated high
Working
school.
now?
She got a GED. Yeah, she's still a hairstylist. Yeah, she works at Great Clips. Yeah, yeah. She just went back.
He's back.
Yeah,
Okay.
like, getting her like her like barbicide COVID training
Right,
stuff,
right.
and yeah, so, you know, mom's like at retirement age, but you know, still like
Nice.
working. So yeah, I'm proud of her. Both my parents. My dad's 70 and he's still working. So,
Amazing. Their story's amazing. That's a whole
yes, yeah,
story.
he does janitorial services at a medical supply plant. So I'm very
Love
proud
it.
of him too.
Love it.
But yeah, keeping in mind that both my parents, you know, like again, you know, both Asian immigrants from different Asian countries, right? Came to Chicago, you know, now it's been, you know, over like 30, 40 years, right? And they're not citizens here, right? But they've lived in this country for a very long time because of us, because my brother and I. My mom gave me a perm when I was like, I want to say I was like maybe 7 or 8, right? I remember it only because I remember being at school. It was like first grade or second grade or something like that. I can't remember exactly the grade period, but I remember going to school and telling people, and this is when I was like still like kind of coming out of ESL and I only knew like a few words. I said something like I'm Shirley Temple, like I'm Asian Shirley Temple.
Oh, you couldn't speak English very well, so you just
yeah, because I used to watch Shirley Temple videos because you know like my parents
learn,
you
right?
know, videos, right, to like watch. And I remember, you know, Shirley Temple singing like animal crackers in my soup. And like I used to like try to sing that out loud, saying, telling everyone I was like Asian Shirley Temple.
That is hilarious.
So yeah, looking back, of course, right? Like that is already a story that tells you, right, how like my whole, you know, childhood identity as like, you know, a young woman of color was like, you know, like the nucleus of it was like a little white girl, right? Like that was like considered the ideal, right? Which tells you a lot, right, about my own upbringing, you know, here in Chicago and other parts of Illinois, because you know, I grew up in Chicago for a good portion and then moved to all lots of different suburbs in Illinois, always in Illinois. But yeah, but I look back and I'm like, that is like a really weird story. But I think it says a lot about me, right? And my family, right? You know, and my parents, yeah, at the time. So,
I think those kinds of stories our students really love when you just are vulnerable and tell those
I
things,
know.
right? It's a one practice we can put into place
Yeah.
to bridge the gap that we feel with our students. I don't feel gaps, but I mean, if they feel it with like who we are, I know
Yeah.
be a good way.
Absolutely. They're so good, right, at calling out what the BS, right? They're like that, you know, like that didn't happen, or you know, they're just so good at you know, interpreting, right? And that's like again, like students are amazing people. Like students I've had, you know, I've been very blessed to have some amazing students who have really challenged my perspective on life, right?
Yeah.
But they know when you're being inauthentic,
Yeah.
and they also know when you're not disclosing, right? Like yeah, and then when we ask them to write stories, right, or to be honest with each other, you know, like how can we do that when we're not practicing that ourselves? So I think that's and you and I have talked about that a lot, right, like about how our choices as teachers, right, is how much of that is aligned to what we are asking our students to also engage with, right? And we got to be real about that. There's no halfway point. You're either all in, right? You're all in with your students or you're not, right? So yeah, and it's tricky. It's tricky. I haven't found the balance in time. I'm still working on that, and you know, that's why I appreciate our partnership. Yeah.
Excellent. Let's transition now into the next portion. So now I'm going to just read a quote, and then we're going to kind of navigate through some of the educational, issues of today. I want to read Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest. He says, stubbornness is an unintelligent barrier, refusing enlightenment and blocking the flow. So as we navigate this discussion today, I just want to remind the audience that if we're coming at any issue in the world today with stubbornness, we are missing the enlightenment that needs to happen. So if you could help maybe talk about, I don't know, some of the maybe, I know we can get so philosophical sometimes, but like some of the things maybe that came through with like systemic problems that we see even during COVID. I think there's a lot of light that came to the system and the struggles we had, but also some success stories too, because I just want to maybe talk more about what that was like for teachers between March and May.
Yeah, so as a just a practicing teacher, right? Trying to negotiate, this time period with my students as well. Um, I was very humbled by the ways in which students were learning, right? And very in ways that we're not tracing, right, in institutions, right? So students are negotiating, what does it mean for me to try to create a structure for myself, right? In terms of school, and what does it mean for me to support my own parents and my own siblings. That's all robust ways that they're learning, right, that we're not necessarily like honoring in their grades, of course, but learning is happening, right, in different ways that we want to at least like acknowledge, right, and respect that that's also learning.
Yeah.
I think that the part that I find difficult during this time period, with especially the media coverage of it, is that there seems to be a surprise, right? That there would be inequities in the ways in which everything unfolded, and I think that that's discouraging, right? That like some teachers, like myself, right, are maybe sometimes at certain moments still surprised about what's happening, as opposed to like we need to move from the surprise state, right? Like, because it's really shouldn't be a surprise, right? These systems have been in place, right, for a very long time.
Yes.
And so we need to move towards action, right, in terms of advocating for students, in terms of making space for them, right, to tell us what it is that we need to do to support them better as intellectuals. I think it's extremely important to recognize that, during this time period, students were, obviously they're already learning in different ways, but we also wanted to recognize that many students were asking to be fed intellectually, right? Like they were asking for ways to be enriched, right, and to be challenged, right, and to be connected with, right. And so it is back on us, right, as teachers, to recognize that there are strategies that I used earlier during the time period that are not working. So I do need to adapt, right? I need to not be stubborn about the ways that I've done things.
Yeah.
I need to recognize that the context is different, and I need to stop trying to replicate a classroom when the geography is literally not there, right? Like we don't have we don't have the physical classroom. We have to find other ways. I by no means am saying that I did that and I was able to accomplish it. I look back now and I'm like, all the things that I was not able to do, I need to be reflect about it. Yeah, I already beat myself up quite a bit, and now I need to move towards, instead of the guilty feeling, right, of like, what am I going to do to change my practice moving forward? How is the way that I'm going to be facilitating remote learning conducive to my own intersectional, culturally sustaining pedagogy that I'm trying very hard to foster? By no means have I been successful, right? I'm humbling myself to the fact that I have not learned yet. So this summer is also a time period for me to engage in professional development, listen from other scholars and other teachers, and listen to the students also, like what worked for them, what didn't work for them.
Right,
How
right.
can I make sure that we're engaging with them as intellectuals, right? Encouraging their creative pursuits and their advocacy and their needs, essentially, as well.
I know you mentioned mistakes and shame, and we don't want this to be a discussion of how we are failing in this system. I
Mm-hmm.
a quote from Sir Ken Robinson, where he says, "Creativity is just as important as literacy." And he says, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you will never come up with anything original. So what I
Mm-hmm.
see in this time period is, I think our school did a great job with handling. We were already set up for remote learning anyway for the snow days, but when we
Mm-hmm.
entered COVID, there was a lot of confusion, but at the same time, a lot that we already knew. And it was harder to reach certain students, just disappeared. To try to track them down was quite a challenge. And then I did miss the rich discussion and the fun and the creativity that would happen in the space when we would share it. So if we could just talk maybe more about, like, I know SEL is social emotional learning is now going to be added to our evaluations. And
Mm-hmm.
some teachers are very concerned about what does that look like for them and how do we do this. If we could talk more about practical steps to maybe incorporate the whole social emotional learning. I can start
Yeah.
if you want. I can
Yeah,
start.
I would
I
love
think
to.
about
Yeah, I would love to hear. Yeah, your
um,
thoughts.
if you think about, like, I know there's this meme going around now with people washing each other's feet and everyone's mocking it. But if you look at John 13 in the Bible, this is the Passion Translation. So if I am your teacher and Lord, and just have washed your dirty feet, then you should follow the example that I've set for you and wash one another's dirty feet. Now do for each other what I have done for you. I speak to you in timeless truth. A servant is not superior to his master, and an apostle is never greater than the one who sent him. So now you put into practice what I have done for you, and you will experience a life of happiness enriched with untold blessings. Now, that is like a metaphor for humility, right? And I know I wanted to be a flight attendant growing up, and oftentimes for fun,
Really good.
I treat the day just like I'm on a flight. So it's 8 a.m., 8:32, we start, the flight takes off. And then at the end of the day, you know, I have a friend who works for Hawaiian Airlines too, that they would call it a turn. They'd go to Hawaii, they'd come back to LA, and it would just be a turn and they'd be home that night. And so I think about the school day the same way. And then 3 o'clock, you know, like 2 o'clock, the last period of the day, everyone's getting a little restless, and you have to roll with that. But at the same time, if I come to them with a servant attitude, now, you know, those flights, you listen to the flight attendant tell you about the safety instructions, and it's like, wah, wah, wah. When you go on Southwest, it's very comical a lot of times, or other airlines might do it too. But it's that same idea. If I come to you like I am a know-it-all and I am the sage on the stage and I am the one that education comes from me, we're missing the point, don't you think? And isn't there so much more creative capacity for these students that we have and what we can do to facilitate that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really appreciate thinking about it in that way. I've never really thought about it exactly in that way. I think you would make a great flight attendant, by the way. But I think that in our classrooms, right? And I'm focusing on the classroom because that's like that's the area that I can serve, right? I know that there's greater change that needs to happen, right, in the school and in the larger systems, right, that have already been prisons, essentially, right? Like we talk about, you know, sometimes schools being these pipelines to prisons, but schools themselves are prisons, right? And you know, and that's not an original thought at all. That's from, you know, scholars. That's from critical race theory. Like that's from, Patricia Collins and Kimberly Crenshaw. Like those are the scholars who have already established that, you know,
Well, it's
if any.
excuse me, it's the thought that could teach you compliance, then when you're prepared for
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And
too brilliant.
right. And I think, you know, a scholar who really talks about like what happens on a larger scale for schools is like a scholar like Dr. Bettina Love, who's, you know, an amazing, you know, teacher researcher. And I think that she's really challenging for classroom teachers to recognize, yes, these systems exist, right? But now what do we do, right? Like, so that's why I do want to recognize the larger system at place and know that like my own journey is not going to necessarily challenge all of those parts, right? But what can I do in my direct classroom? You know, SEL should not be thought of, for me, right? It should not be thought of as separate of what we do, right? Like students are whole human beings, right? And we can't just keep saying that, like we have to actually practice it. So when it comes down to the choices that I'm going to be making, right, about my curriculum, right, choices I'm going to be making about how to structure a space in the classroom, right, about how to engage with students online, you know, there's practical things that I need to do, right? First off, right, I need to make choices about what I'm presenting for students, right? If I recognize that during this time, you know, my own positionality as an Asian American woman, right, I need to be mindful of how I talk about race, right? And it's not, it cannot be with this greater, you know, brush of like, oh, we're going to talk about these, you know, broad terms of, you know, inequity and you know, Black Lives Matter. It's not my place to use these broad terms, right? It's also not my place to speak about it as if I fully acknowledge, you know, I have all these lived experiences that I don't, right? I need to be specific about my positionality, right? Specific about, you know, the intersections of my own identity, right? I need to be mindful of the text that I choose. Am I always providing for students just the texts that essentially are examples of trauma, right, that have happened to the Black and Brown community? Or am I making sure to center, right, Black excellence, right, to center opportunities for students to tell me these are the types of texts that I want to read, and we want to read robust, rich texts, right? That's just good teaching practice, right? Am I valuing students' intellectualism, right? Like, am I valuing, right, their ability to question, right? What is the skill that I'm teaching, right? Like, what am I supposed to be fostering, right?
Well, if you think of the timeless skills of life, the timeless
right.
skills that say all technology, we're all like eradicated, nobody's left. I still think we need critical thinking, and I still think we need to be able to communicate, right? Those are all
Oh,
embedded into
good. Yeah, yeah. I mean, if we want to get down to like, the real specifics of like, what is our curriculum going to look like on paper, right? We need to have Common Core standards on it. Like that's what it is, right? But all of that language, yeah, that's the stuff I need to take care of and situate myself. It should guide my focal points in terms of like, what am I selecting on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis? How am I using backward design? Like, this is all good teaching, right? Like that's what research has shown us. This is best practice. But the truth is that all of that, right? Every choice that I make needs to be informed with my lens on recognizing that my students are complex human beings, right? And that I do need to take care and make space, right, to recognize the students have very different lived experiences, right? My school in particular is very, demographically diverse, right? So there are lots of different lived experiences. How do I normalize the idea of checking in with them about their emotional well-being, right? How do I normalize the practice of us speaking from I, right? And speaking from experience, right? Using their lived experience also as evidence for, as data, right? To back up their claims as well, right? We often discount, data that is anecdotal, right? That is stories, right? We look at quantities, right? Quantitative data, right, has always had a greater place than the qualitative, and that's problematic, right? Like, education research shows that, every type of research shows that, right? But we know that science can be, absolutely, numbers can be manipulated, right? It's about interpretation. So how do we make sure how do I make sure, I'll just speak from the I, right? How do I make sure that my choices are communicating to students that I value them as complex human beings, right? I value their intellectualism. I am reaching for them I'm trying to foster a space where they can ask questions, and we can try to we can look for answers together, right? That's data driven, right? That's privileging also their stories. And then how do we normalize language that allows us to recognize each other's humanity, right? And I know that term is used so much, right? But it really is about humanity, right? Like, how do we normalize that language so it's not a cliche? It's not just, jargon that social justice warriors use, right? But that we're practicing it in our interactions together. If I'm not reaching out to a student consistently, right? If my practice is not to consistently reach out to them, consistently to reach out to family members, to try to partner with them in supporting the student, right? If I'm not consistent, I didn't just do it once, I did it twice, I did it 3 times, I tried my best on a weekly basis to do that, then how much can I really say that I really did, right? It's the consistency piece that I think I need to be accountable for. And so I need to call myself out on that. And that's what I'll be working on for the fall, right? The consistency in which I make sure that I'm privileging students' entire being, right? Through the process of learning, right? Because that's what really I value about education.
I'm thinking what you were just saying too is, what teachers, they're also complex human beings, and I think oftentimes we are treated like cardboard cutouts, right? So we got to maybe talk about
That's a really good
how
point.
can we as a staff navigate the difficult conversations that we need to have in order to get that change where we do need to value. I know in the National Writing Project we learned argument isn't binary. It's not I'll say black versus blue. It is multiple perspective. It is nuanced. It is deeper than we allow it. And I think as a society, we try to make things binary to make control and pick a side. And it's not picking a side. It's about what is right for human life. And so I want to maybe think about, as a staff, what we can do is really meet everyone where they're at in the struggle that we've been through, and not shaming each other, and really truly trying to listen to the concerns, because I think people come in when they don't feel safe with the topic or whatever, they just immediately shut it down. And I don't think that's, as educators especially, are we not lifelong learners, and do we not need to also model that and also be a part of the struggle, and just admit, it's okay, I don't know it all, and it's okay that and I can't argue that your reality or your perception is not true, because it's not my reality. So
no, I appreciate that. And I think that there is something really important about recognizing that teaching is not like a competitive profession, right? Like, I didn't get into this to be the best. Like, I got into this to be part of a community, right? To be a public servant, right? Like, I do believe in the type of servitude, right? And I don't mean that, I have to be careful about not embodying or practicing a type of like white saviorism,
No, no,
right?
no.
That's dangerous, right? And that's something that I need to be mindful of for myself. But I do need to not absolve myself of my responsibility to be actively engaged in a community of learners, right? And for me, yeah, it's teachers, right? Like we don't teach in the same school. We've never have, right? We're not in the same district, like we're cities apart. But the truth is that there's an accountability piece for both of us, right? To recognize. I think that there also is this notion that, for us, right? Like for you and I, as an Asian woman, as a white woman, like there's opportunities that we have in our own communities, right? Within our own racial affinity groups to call each other out in ways that are mindful of each other's humanity, right? Like I just had this like really intense conversation with a friend of mine who, identifies as Korean American, and we did have a very intense discourse back and forth, right? And I had to really hone my language, right, with her. Like this is a friend I've had for years. Like we know each other since high school. And I had to be very blunt with her about the fact that I think we have to be careful about the way that we talk about our own racial, experiences, right? In the broader conversation about race, right? Because Asians are not, we're not a monolithic group, right? We are also not Black. Like we can't talk about issues around Black Lives Matter with the same positionality. That's just wrong. Like it's just unethical and it's inaccurate, right? So I think that there's opportunities where I respect you, Amy, and I think that because you and I have this relationship, I can respectfully say, hey, Amy, I have a follow-up question about the choice that you made to say it that way, right? And I know that because you respect me, that you would call me out to say, hey, Patty, I think that you're engaging in a type of savioristic language or behavior, right? Let's evaluate that. And let's just move forward with a path to really do what we said we were going to do for our students, right? Which is not to raise my voice above theirs, but to raise the voices of our students, especially our Black and brown students, right? Especially our students who are, especially our LGBTQIA students, right? Who are, again, consistently silenced in these academic spaces, right? Because were never made for them in the first place, right? This was not a, and I have to be honest about my own positionality in terms of, language as well. English is not my first language. It isn't, right? So I need to be, I want to be open with my students about that, right? Recognize that we as learners come from very different trajectories, and that can be a beautiful thing. It doesn't have to be a deficit, right? We need to use asset-based language, right? We need to recognize joy, right? We need to recognize accomplishment and excellence. And it's not to say that we, eliminate or by no means, cast aside the stories that are clearly, right, evidence of the oppression that white, hetero, often Christian, like society, male dominated patriarchy has created, right? It is this, let's not like ignore the larger construct, right? But I need to be mindful of giving students, right, giving students space to express the breadth of their experiences, right? Like I can't keep presenting stories of oppression, right? And think that I'm doing right by my students. No. Did you even ask your students what stories they wanted to read, right? Did you think about them, right? Did you think about their culture and what is really sustaining, right, for their culture? And I'm not at a place to say that I know what's right for their culture. Of course not. Like I'm who I am, right? I need to ask them. I need to listen, right? I just need to listen more. And so I think teachers can maybe express to each other in the ways that we're doing right now. This is how I'm trying to, keep myself in check. Will you help me, right? Will you help me stay accountable to my pedagogy that I said I was bold into? I will help you as well, right? Let's do this as a partnership, because teaching is not competitive. Like I don't, and I know I'm not saying that, that I'm thinking of particular people, but I recognize that sometimes that's a dynamic because we live in a capitalistic society, right? Like it is just what it is, right? Like let's just name it for, let's name the capitalism that drives sometimes our emotions and our choices, right? But I need to be in check. And so I'm asking you, Amy, to keep me accountable. And then I hope you're okay with the fact that I would love to keep you accountable consistently. And we've done that for each other.
Well,
and I appreciate that.
Certainly you mentioned that I know the religious right comes off, or like the Christians, and I am a Christian, but I don't want to ever come off as that spirit of the religiosity. They speak about this in the Bible. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were called out, and Jesus was the one that was really loving the people. And so I follow Jesus and the way he rolled. And that's what I hope that I continue to do in any struggle. And never are we perfect. that is why we need him, right? So that's been my thing. But let's try to close this conversation out. Man, this could be a whole like TV show in numbers.
Yes, we could go on for a while.
But
Yeah.
I think that if we could talk about the last thing I'm thinking of here, let me see. If we could just go like at the end of a classroom, we'll do a 3, 2, 1, and
Right.
do a 3 takeaways you want the audience to go away with, 2 questions that we still have, and then 1 word.
Look for your resources, right? And I mean this also humbly as a teacher who's trying to do this, right? So for anyone who's like watching or listening, right? Like this is very much from a humble position of like, I am a growing teacher. I'm just reaching my 10th year. Like, I'm learning, I'm growing. I will be doing these things, right? Welcoming other folks to do it with us. Looking for resources, right? Like resources are not just things, right? They're people, right? So we are resources to each other, right? Leverage those resources. Recognizing number 2, that, in practical choices, we make curricular choices, right? That's what we're going to do. Like I'm going to choose a text, right? I'm going to choose the skills, right? How am I going to make sure that the choices that I make, right, are communicating for students what I value about education, which is I value the people, I value the student and their humanity, right? So are my choices communicating that? Yes or no? It's I know it's not as simple as that, but I do need to ask myself that question, yes or no? Practical choices, right? Practical things that I'm doing. And then number 3, like recognizing that obviously we might go into a remote learning circumstance, right? Hybrid learning, something like that, right? There are opportunities for us to think about the difference, right, between tools, right, and actual learning opportunities, right? TikTok is a tool, right? Yeah, like these are tools, right? Like Google Classroom is a tool. It's not the learning opportunity. So distinguishing in my mind, what are the tools that I'm using? Am I overwhelming myself with trying to adapt and trying to get my students to adapt to a bunch of tools, right? Is that important? And am I really centering the learning opportunities there, right? Which means I need to think practically from the student's perspective. My students go through 9 periods a day, right? One of them is a lunch period, but like they may have upwards of 8 classes. I need to think about them and how they're experiencing school. Like it's not just me. Yes, it's not just about.
Yes,
exactly. So if I choose to use 4 or 5 different digital tools, and I think that that's, keeping learning interesting, what learning opportunities are happening? What learning am I centering in that? Is that helpful to students, right? Like, is that really helpful? So I need to be mindful of that. And I'm still a student, like I'm working on the PhD, but I'm still a student. So I'm thinking about how I experienced it. And I was like, I don't like 17 different tools. Like, I just give me the 4 things that I can work with, right? That I feel like will really center me on the learning part, as opposed to me trying to learn a new tool. So I want to, leave with at least one of, that as a practical idea, to rethink the idea of tool versus learning opportunity. Questions I still have for myself, right? And for, for my colleagues and for the 2 of us is like, how is our teaching reflective of our pedagogy? Like, I'm grappling with that. So that's the question I'm going to constantly be grappling with, right? And then secondly, how am I keeping myself accountable throughout the year? Not just in the beginning where there's good, beginning of school energy, right? But like in March, when, like, I don't know about other folks, but like it's a hard period, right? Like it's a hard, like I'm a little tired.
A welcome break for me. I know that.
Right. Spring break seems too far away, right? And I feel the kids and like their frustration sometimes. Like I'm like, you need to. Like, I'm like, we all need to take a nap. But how am I going to be consistently accountable, right, to my goals? And how am I also going to practice what I'm actually saying right now, right? Not just for myself and my students, but for my colleagues as well, right? Like, how are we going to both hold ourselves accountable to this, right? Am I going to be honest with you, Amy, about my missteps, right? And if I'm not honest, then, clearly, I know what choices I'm making, right, in terms of being an educator. Education and the choices we make as teachers it's not apolitical, right? And it's the most ethically complicated thing that I feel like folks can do, right? So I need to be mindful of my positionality, and the choices that I make on a daily basis. And then I think you were going to ask about a word, right?
One word.
Is that what you?
Yeah.
One word. listen. Yeah, for me, it's just listen. I need to listen. Yeah, I need to be humble to the fact that I do not have the answers. I am still very much learning. I am so blessed, right, to have good colleagues like you, and I have a lot of great colleagues at ETHS, and I've got good colleagues at the other schools I've worked at. I'm very fortunate to be among other, people, especially women, right? A lot of these are, are women of color, who have been, my greatest mentors, my greatest teachers. I'm so grateful for that. But the word I need to keep reminding myself now, all the way to March, is listen, because I'm not there yet. Yeah.
I
So
think
I'm
humility, what we talked about earlier, and listening go hand in
Mhm.
hand. And we do not
Yeah.
know it all. We do not know it all. We do not
Right.
know it all. So
Right.
let's
We
end on,
definitely do. Yeah.
yeah, let's end on that note. Patty, I love you. Thank you so much for joining
I
me. It's
appreciate
been such
it.
a pleasure to
Thank
talk with you,
you.
and I will see
I
you
appreciate it.
soon.
I know. Miss you. Thank you.
Bye.